Oh, hello there. Warhammer 40k, the oh so friendly grimdark sci-fi series, where you can meet all kinds of lovely people, from the extremely zealous people of the Imperium to some very grumpy, sleepy Egyptian robot Terminator guys. Or just, the orcs having a good time, or the Kroot just chilling and eating with their friends. Or the Mechanicus, engineers who's really been bonding with the technology. Like literally bonding with technology. I could probably make like an introductory video to the series on like the different factions, which would probably be the sensible thing to do. But you can already find tons of information about Warhammer and 40k Warhammer in general from other creators. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, what I want to talk about are some of the newer storylines in Warhammer 40k and kind of just talk a little bit about them and what I think. So I'm sorry if you're really new to Warhammer 40k. I would still invite you to join, but it will probably be a little bit confusing with the characters and the plots and like the world building in general. And there's going to be a lot of spoilers in this video. So spoilers for the Dawn of War series, Plague War, Dark Imperium series, basically any of the books about Belisarius Call, and the Walls of Terror series, and Lion Son of the Forest book also. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about all this is that I saw a questionnaire thingy a while back where most people expressed that they were more interested in like the Horus Heresy or like the earlier parts of 40k, so Eisenhorn and all that stuff, before all robot Gilliman stuff began. Especially with like Cadia and when the giant rift appeared, cutting the Imperium in half. Which is, by the way, totally fair, and I understand that. But I wanted to give just a little bit of attention and some love to the newer stuff and the newer plot lines, so to speak, because I personally really like them. Though it's totally fair if it's not your cup of tea. And when I say newer stuff, what I really mean is like timeline-wise in Warhammer 40k. Some of these newer stories do have some years to them. Like for example the book Belisarius and the Great Work. That book is from like 2019 I think. So it's already been like 7 years or something since it's been out. But like storyline wise and where it's placed in the timeline is pretty new compared to some of the other stuff. And even though I would say I'm pretty good into the lore, there's probably still mistakes somewhere that's going to be made about the lore because of the immense amount of lore and world building and nuance and all that. But anyway, let's get into it. I really want to talk about the Dawn of Fire series, which can pretty confidently see is some of the newest lore right now. One of the books even has like some of the League of Votann characters in it. So yeah. Then it's kinda new when you got League of Votann in it. Though like at the end of the series, they kinda make it sound like it ties to Plague War and Dark Imperium and all the stuff that's going to happen with like Mortarion and Gilliman and their fight. So it's before that, even though the series is kinda new. But so yeah, you get what I mean with the funny timeline stuff. But the new lore is still new and to the specific timeline. I make this really confusing. But I just like the Dawn of Fire series even though Dark Imperium comes after. And I really like this series. It do have some pitfalls like the Horus Heresy, where some books doesn't really feel relevant to the plot at all. But you still, in general, in the series really get insight into how the new Crusade Gilliman has like started is going. And through the different books you get to see the different factions and how they cope with how the world and the universe is changing. And just in general what's happening right now in the current lore. Some of my favorite books in the series is The Gate of Bones, I really like that one, and The Wolf Time. You get one guess about which factions the Wolf Time is about. And also the last book in the series, The Silent King. I think it's the last book in the series at least. Like with a lot of Warhammer book series, there's a lot of fluff, but there's also some really freaking cool plot points that I'm going to talk about right now. Like the Hand of Abaddon, this whole like plot of evil villains trying this whole thing of making a weapon to kill like Gilliman or the Emperor. Like connecting back to some of the plot lines from Warhammer 30k with Horus Heresy, with the Horus Heresy, and like doing some ties there, and then again trying to kill like the Emperor and Gilliman and stuff like that, which is, it's still pretty loose what it's all about, but I like the threat that it creates, like this thing that has to be faced at some point. Also just in general, like Gilliman's reconquest of the stars, and all the politics and all the themes and things that are going into it there. And though the plot is so freaking big, it can be a little bit hard to follow this whole reconquest, crusade thingy. Because there's so many moving parts. Especially since it goes beyond the Dawn of Fire series and like Dark Imperium series. But it is really cool to see humanity trying to fight back in these dark times. With the Milky Way getting split in half by the warp. By this giant warp with this Maledictum? I don't know, that's probably wrong, but the name is there somewhere. And talking about giant demon warp rifts, let's talk a little bit about Belisarius Cawl. Like, Belisarius Cawl and his whole adventures are really amazing, and I really enjoy him as a character. And again, spoilers for everything about Belisarius Cawl, but I really like the goal he has right now with using the Necron technologies to close the warp rift. You both hear about it in the Dawn of War series and also in like some of his special books in general. But now that he has made the Primaris Marines, his next goal is to tame the technology of the Necrons to finally close the giant warp rift across, the Imperium. And that is really interesting. And Belisarius Cawl is also just a great character in general. Like, he's such a freaking awesome. He's just, going on adventures. He's this quirky grandpa guy. But he's also a genius with the biggest ego ever. He is, of course, Belisarius Cawl. So, that obviously he's a genius. And then there's also the Lion coming back, which, if you've forgotten, is still a thing. The last thing we heard from him is from a codex or something, where he's trying to contact Robudi Guilliman and actually, get them together to have a meeting. Which I think it really should have happened by now, but I'm still really interested to see what happens there. And I think it could be really cool for these characters to get some more weight in the story. But I do also understand, like, some 40k fans don't really want to basically have a Primarch-centric universe again, like in the Horus Heresy. But even though I do agree a little bit with that, it also just sounds so freaking cool to have them meet again. Especially since it's been stated lots of time how haggard and stressed and kinda lonely Guilliman actually is. So I think it could be pretty cool as long as they handle the whole plot the right way. But I would really like the characters to interact and do stuff in the plot again. Together at least. Or at least to have some teamwork and also conflict happening between the Primarchs. I think that would be really cool. But that's just my personal opinion. But yeah, also just like the Lion in general and his whole character evolution / his character arc in his book is so freaking amazing. Like, he's really matured as a character, which I also think is why I also love him. And I would also love them to meet again because he's a whole different character. Where Robudi Guilliman is kind of still the same character, just more depressed and stressed. So yeah. Then, as you also hear about in, for example, the Silent King book, there's also this whole mini civil war going on with the Mechanicus, since they had to find a new Fabricator General since the last one, spoilers for the World of Terror, as you can read about in the World of Terror series, had some weird dealings with the Dark Eldar. So like the head honcho from the Mechanicus is not really there, so they had to find a new leader, and there's some tension there also, which is really interesting. And I hope some interesting plotlines happens there also, to see what happens with the Mechanicus in general. And then there's also the whole Necron thing really beginning to rise and becoming a threat again. So I'm really looking forward to some of these plot threads and to see how they resolve. Just like I talked about in my League of Legends video, I do think that not everything will be resolved, like really, since you always need to keep the story going, because they can't just end it, But I still think, even though you can't just kill off some of the very important characters, that some of the story points do have some potential, and do have some potentials to do some really cool stuff and get resolved. Even though we can't, finish the plot of Warhammer 40k in general. I still think that we can really do some cool things with like the Necron technology and closing the rift and the Emperor awakening and all that kind of stuff. And also with Guilliman being back in the Imperium and how all these political conflicts are happening in the Imperium. So we can still do some very cool things, I believe. And it will probably take some time for the story and the plot to progress. But hey, we got tons of lore and books to read in the meanwhile. So at least it's not going to be boring while we wait for the plot to actually progress. So yeah, anyways, anyhow, thanks for watching. Bye bye.